Disclaimer. Judge Ron Rangel is providing this podcast and website for educational purposes only, as well as to give the public general information regarding topics related to the criminal justice system. The views, thoughts, and opinions of his guest speakers are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Judge Rangel. All rise. You are now listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, educating the public and expanding mindsets. Subscribe on our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform for more of the latest podcast episodes and updates.
Greetings, this is Ron. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today. I have somebody in the studio. Her name is Julieta Schulze. She was born in Mexico and moved to the United States at the age of 4, growing up in San Antonio. Now, she graduated from Holmes High School and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Spanish from the University of Texas at San Antonio. She later earned a Master of Arts degree in bilingual legal court interpreting from the University of Charleston in South Carolina. She has been a licensed court interpreter in the state of Texas and has worked as a staff interpreter for the Bexar County courts since 2005 through 2012. Now, as a freelance court interpreter, Julieta has interpreted and translated for many impressive organizations. She's been a professor at the College of Charleston and at Northwest Vista College in San Antonio. She currently works as an adjunct professor teaching Spanish at San Antonio College since 2004. She also teaches an orientation course for court interpreting approved by the Judicial Branch of Court Certification. Now, since 2012, I was one of the individuals who selected and hired Julieta as the Chief Central Jury Bailiff for Bexar County, where she's been running local jury operations for 11 years. Welcome, Julieta.
Thank you, Judge. I'm so excited to be here.
You are a very busy person.
A little bit.
How do you accomplish everything that you do?
I manage my time, I guess.
Time management.
I have goals and standards and things I want to achieve.
Let me ask you the very first question I have. Why are you titled the Central Jury Room Bailiff? To me, that tells me that you have a uniform, you have a gun by your side, maybe a nightstick, and you work for the sheriff. Is that right?
Well, that is what probably the majority of you think, but that is not so. That is just a title that is given to Chief Central Jury Bailiff because of a statute that says the bailiffs are the ones that communicate with jurors. They're the ones that organize the jury panels and so forth. So the district judges are the ones that are actually in charge of jury operations and have appointed me or hired me to assemble the jury every day, the jury pool. And so by statute, I have to be named jury bailiff.
So you are the person that runs the jury room.
That is correct.
And you run the jury room on behalf of the 27 district court judges in Bexar County.
That is correct.
So let's talk about that. What do you do as a jury room bailiff in Bexar County?
I send out summons. Every citizen in Bexar County, and some of you may like it when they receive the summons, and some of you may not. So I feel like I might be the most hated woman until you meet me, and then you change your mind.
You or Julieta?
Exactly.
Okay, so what you're telling us is that you recognize that sometimes when people get that summons in the mail, they see your name and they curse it.
I believe so. I believe so.
But then they come in, and I think by the end of their jury service, they're very, very happy of having been summoned and coming in and being part of the process, right?
I think so, because we try to accommodate jurors. We try to make them feel at home. Although it's difficult to make anybody feel at home when you're not at home. But we try to accommodate them, and we try to take their time into consideration. We try to get them out as quickly as possible if they're not going to be needed, or as soon as the court releases them. And so I think that once they come, they realize, you know what, one day spending it here, isn't so bad.
So you and your staff are the folks behind the scenes that make all of jury operations work.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about that. How many summons go out every single week so folks then come into the courthouse and allow us to proceed with jury trials?
So just to give you an idea, we summoned about 1,700 jurors every day.
Mm-hmm.
Which then yields about 550 to 600. And by that I mean that the rest of the people that don't answer or don't come to jury service, it's because they've asked for postponements, they've qualified for exemptions or excuses, or moved. And so that's why we summon so many, because we need to make sure that we get that many jurors that are able to and qualify.
All right, so it's my understanding that you are able to get a certain number of folks appear based on a formula that you have.
Yes.
What does that formula look like?
So out of those 1,700, I estimate that 33% of that number will appear. And I would say that about 98% of them show up.
All right, so when you say 98% show up, you mean they go online, they register?
Yes, they go online, they register through our bear.org/jury.
Mm-hmm.
In 2021, we started a new system where the judges and Judge Rangel, you were part of this, approved to have jurors register online. Mm-hmm. Which makes it it makes the whole process a lot easier, actually, because we can actually see how many people are registering, and we can actually disqualify or excuse or postpone jurors online, so that way they don't have to come all the way downtown. We can take care of that before they come.
Well, since you're talking about COVID, let's get right into that, right? I guess that's a big part of discussion. I was the local administrative judge in 2020 when COVID hit. And when COVID hit, you and I immediately had to get together and we had to make determinations as to when to stop in-person jury trial. You remember that day?
Yes, I remember.
I do
We
too.
were going back and forth until we looked at everything and looked at everything that was coming out, and you decided that the jurors' health and the people of Bexar County were more important than continuing something that could later harm them.
And so then you and I set out on a course for the next 2 years, trying to make sure that we completely revamped how we did jury trials in Bexar County.
Yes.
So let's start from the beginning. Once we suspended jury trials, we had to basically figure out how we're going to start in-person hearings again. And that resulted in a series of meetings where you and I had to get together pretty much every single day, figure out a system to present to the judges so the judges then would feel comfortable in proceeding with in-person trials.
That's correct. We've worked many hours trying to come up with a system that where we could qualify jurors without risking their health and bringing them to the courtrooms. And so I believe we came up with a really good system that I want to say that we are probably, Bexar County is one of the fewest, if not the only one, that qualified jurors by Zoom.
So what does that mean?
So we would send out the summons, and instead of telling them to report to the central jury downtown here in Bexar County, we had them report on a virtual courtroom. And we had about 500 jurors.
Every day?
Zoom every day.
Monday through Friday.
Through Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had about 2,500 jurors a week that would show up, and all those jurors were used. We had assigned courts, specific days, and we would send those jurors to the courtroom the following day in person. And so that way we controlled the amount of people that would be then gathering in a particular place for a long period of time. So we didn't want to do that. They would go directly into the courtroom.
So in order to get 2,500 people actually appear via Zoom, how many summons had to go out every week?
About 1,700
So 1,700 a day.
a day.
That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. It was a lot of work.
Uh-huh.
But I think the citizens, Bexar County citizens, they embraced it and they liked it because they didn't have to come downtown. They knew if they were going to get selected to be in a panel or not, which the majority of them were. But the good thing about doing that was that If a court at the last minute or it didn't go or the case settled or it pled out, then they would call me and they would say, we no longer need our panel. We would then send out an email or a text message and we would cancel those jurors. And so they were happy. They didn't have to come at all. And so they fulfilled their service. And so then they have credit for 3 years. They don't have to show up if they don't want to in 3 years. But if you want to, you can.
When did we start virtual impaneling of jurors?
We actually started with the civil courts.
Mm-hmm.
The civil courts, because the law allowed it to have jury trials. The civil courts started back in late 2020. We did a pilot program where we only summoned a few jurors, enough for one courtroom. And come January 2021, civil courts were having virtual jury trials, but only for the civil courts. Criminal didn't get started until much later when we could actually come in person.
I'm going to say probably about March of 2022.
Correct. I think we started back in August of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
We started with some of the criminals. It was very limited.
Some of the criminal courts?
Yes. It was one criminal district court, 2 county courts, 1 civil court until March of 2022.
So pre-COVID, the way it worked, people would get summoned. They would come into the courthouse. They didn't have the opportunity to go online and register.
Correct.
Right. So they would come into the courthouse. Then they would have an opportunity to speak to you or a member of your staff. They would sit in the big jury room downstairs, which sits up to about 550 people. Standing room, theoretically, up to 625-ish. And then a judge would come in, a district judge, give a speech, talk about qualifications and what it takes to qualify, talk about exemptions, give folks an opportunity to speak to that judge or somebody on your staff to see if they qualified and to see if there was an exemption they wanted to exercise. Subsequent to that, you would place them on a panel. How many employees did you have at that time?
Pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID.
I had about 7.5 because I have a part-timer.
And that's probably because it only required a couple of people downstairs to talk to the jurors while they were being qualified.
Yes.
So once COVID hit and we developed the system of qualifying people online virtually, what kind of demands did that put on your office?
It increased our job by double, practically. So I now have 14 employees under me. So it doubled due to COVID and the new way of summoning people. We had a lot of phone calls, obviously, because people were nervous. They needed to ask questions regarding safety and, of course, questions regarding jury. Because people now could communicate through email, I had over 2, 3, sometimes up to 500 emails a day. And so I needed staff to do that, plus staff to process people on Zoom, to appear them, talk to them, make sure we have all their information, and then go through the whole qualifications to see if some of them needed to be disqualified, etc.
So in order to get to that point, you and I had to develop a new summons.
That's correct.
And the summons had a QR code that folks could get on. They could use their device, log on, get to the Bexar County jury website.
Yes.
And then through that website, they would put in their information. And a lot of times they'd communicate virtually. So you had to respond to all that.
That's right.
And then as a result of that, your phone call traffic increased significantly.
Yes.
On top of that, instead of taking a few people from your staff to greet individuals coming into the courthouse and speaking to them at that moment, you now had to have folks organize virtually through Zoom, get people into rooms, and that took up a lot more time.
Yes.
So the way the Constitution operates, you are selected or hired by the district judges. The funding comes from the state and from the local county, which is operated by the Commissioner's Court. And so it wasn't very easy getting you that extra help initially.
That is right.
I had to go before the Commissioner's Court after writing them a few letters. It was almost unanimous prior to my appearance in Commissioner's Court in understanding as to the strains and pressures that were put on you, because jail population was rising without jury trials. And so that obviously increased costs, There's some issues related to the Constitution. There were other constitutional issues that were important in dealing with juries and jury trials. And so that's a different conversation. Prior to actually starting in-person jury trials, we did have in-person qualification process because we did change how criminal district courts started doing the grand jury process. Do you want to tell us how grand juries changed during COVID?
Because of COVID, we started doing a grand jury by Zoom. So that changed because they used to report directly to the courtroom. And, but because of COVID, they had to appear on Zoom just to make sure that about safety and making everybody feel comfortable that they weren't going to get COVID and so forth. And so we would send out the summons, and the judge that is presiding over that particular grand jury would then appear and speak to them and give them a welcome.
All right, so let me ask you some common questions that I think a lot of folks generally have about jury duty. First of all, the big one, the main one, what happens if somebody gets summoned and they don't show up?
That's a very good question. It's a question I always get asked. What happens? So the law says that if you don't answer a summons, because a summons is actually a court order. Judge's name is on that summons. So this judge is the one that is actually the one summoning you to appear for jury duty. And the law says that if you don't appear, you could be fined anywhere between $100 to $1,000, and you can be found in contempt of court.
How specifically do you get the names that you summon?
That's a good question, because it's not like people register to be in jury duty or anything like that. We actually get a list called a reel. It's a jury list that is compiled of text of the voter registration names, as well as DPS. And DPS is not just the license. If you hold an ID, your name is going to end up in that list. The Secretary of State will then prepare that list for us. And every year we get a new list that goes into our IT department, and they randomize those names so that everything could be random and people get selected that way. But the names come from the Secretary of State.
So when you say a list, what you do is you hit some button, and then whatever names come out, those are the individuals that get summoned?
Yes.
It's completely random.
Completely random.
Why is it that some people tell me, I was summoned a year ago, I came in, I've been on 3 or 4 juries in my life, whereas other people say I've never gotten a summons in my life?
So that's a good question. I was actually asked that a while back, and I'm not really sure if he was complaining or he was happy. So I answered this way. I said, consider yourself fortunate or not. I'm not sure, but I have no idea why some people get summoned 3 or 4 times and some don't.
Go buy a lottery ticket.
That exactly.
Jurors always talk about, hey, this is how much we get paid. We get paid $6 a day, $40 for every day after. Is that right?
That's correct.
Jurors actually don't get paid for jury duty, do they?
That is correct. Mm-hmm. We're not paying you. It's a reimbursement. Mm-hmm. And it's a reimbursement based from years ago where they thought, okay, we're going to help them pay for their parking. We're going to help them maybe get some lunch, but it's not a payment. It's a reimbursement.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of parking, I know that judges oftentimes don't like the fact that jurors have to pay in order to come to the courthouse. And they regularly ask me about what is it that we as judges can do to get jurors free parking.
That is the same question I get asked. And some jurors understand and some jurors don't. They feel that they shouldn't pay.
Right.
And if you ask me, I think they shouldn't pay. Uh-huh. But I have no control over the garage. I have no control over the parking. Uh-huh. We do offer a validation that the county has agreed to, and jurors can park in the Bexar County garage and just pay a $3 parking fee with validation from the central jury.
As long as there's room.
As long as there's room. And the county does offer prepaid bus tickets. Mm-hmm. So you can park at a park and ride and take the bus to the central jury. We will give you tickets to do that.
So when jurors get summoned, sometimes they worry about their jobs. Sometimes they ask questions like, can I get fired? for having to come in and serve?
That's a very, very good question, because some people are confused about that. And I think some employers are also confused. No, you cannot get fired. There is a statute that protects you. We've sent out a few letters to employers citing the statute that says you cannot hold the employee responsible for coming to jury duty, because it is a court order from a judge. So we have sent out letters, judges have sent out letters to employers. So actually the employer could get in trouble if they threatened or they dismiss someone for appearing for jury duty.
I know every jury trial we got to prepare letters in my office and explain the fact that the individual was summoned and they didn't have an option, but they had to come into court. What about those individuals that have those jobs that they're really worried about? They say things like, I'm not going to get paid for being here. I got to support my family. Sometimes you have professionals that say, I have an office, or I have patients, I have clients. Without my presence, they're going to have to reschedule. It's going to be great hardship to them. What about those individuals?
So those individuals, we offer them a postponement. We want to be understanding. However, at the level that we qualify, which is the very beginning, all we are allowed to do is qualify by what the statute says. And the statute doesn't say anything about any type of hardship. That is something that is spoken about in front of the judge that they are assigned to and the attorney. But we always offer a postponement for a better time. And maybe there isn't a better time, but at least they can make arrangements.
Like if somebody has young children, or if somebody has some sort of surgical procedure, you can postpone them for the summertime.
We can postpone them for a couple of months. All we're allowed to postpone is 6 months. And so we will do that. We will always offer that. Of course, just keep in mind, we do need jurors. So we can't postpone everybody.
Otherwise, we won't have any jury trials.
Exactly.
Right? What about people that come in and say things like, I'm a peace officer, so I know they're not going to pick me. Do I have to stay?
And my answer is yes.
How come?
Because, once again, we qualify based on the statute. And being a peace officer, being somebody from even judges, doesn't excuse you from the first step, which is our qualifications. And so once you come to us, we tell you, please bring that up to judge and the attorneys. They will make a determination on whether you can stay or not stay. What I do is qualify them based on whatever the statute states. So
what you're doing is you're dealing with two separate issues. You're dealing with, is this person that summoned qualified? In other words, can they read and write English? Are they 18 years of age or older? If they don't have a felony or misdemeanor theft conviction, or one that's pending, there's some of those. So once you know they're qualified, then the question is, do they have an exemption that they want to exercise?
Yes.
And there's confusion there sometimes. For instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody has a child under the age of 12. Well, the statute says you can exercise an exemption if you have a child under the age of 12 and there's no one else to care for them.
Right.
Because of your jury service. Under the age of 12 means they got to be 11 years of age or younger.
Right. And misinterpret that exemption, because if they have a child that is 11, first of all, or younger, but you're a working parent, that doesn't qualify you for that exemption. You have to be a mom who is at 24, or a dad who's 24/7 there with the child, and leaving that child unattended can cause harm. And that's what we don't want. And so what that statute does is it helps parents who have children under the age of 12 who are picking up their kids at 2, who pick up their kids at 3, and nobody else can pick them up, and they don't go to daycare. And so then we try to accommodate. We ask if there's somebody else that can pick them up, or postpone you for the summertime.
What about individuals that have recently served in federal court? Does that have anything to do with getting summoned in state court?
No. If you're summoned for federal court, that's a whole different entity. You can still serve with pettit at the county level or state level. We have nothing to do with the federal government. And so, unfortunately, you wouldn't get the exemption, so you would have to stay.
It's a very different experience in the federal courts.
It's very different. You're on call for a month in federal court. Here, it's one day, one trial.
All right, let's do a quick Q&A break. We'll be right back.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at BeyondTheGavelPodcast.com.
Welcome to Beyond the Gavel. This is a Q&A break. We got a question from Jacob. The question reads as follows. In another court I've experienced, I realized that the bailiffs call out the case numbers, but whenever I've seen you preside, you call out the case number. Why is that? Essentially, every judge calls the docket in whatever way they desire to, in whatever way they see fit. So some judges call the docket out in a way where they actually announce the entire case style. They'll say, State of Texas versus so-and-so. In fact, every part of the courtroom process is really determined by what the judge prefers. Jacob, thanks for asking.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at BeyondTheGavelPodcast.com.
Welcome back. I'm here talking to Julieta. Now, you've been working with us in Bexar County as the central jury room bailiff for over a decade.
Yes.
And in that time, we've had a lot of changes that have happened within the central jury room.
Yes.
Now, during that time, what are some of the changes that you've been proud of?
So the first thing that I did when I got there was I spoke to the judges, and we decided to close the smoking room. I believe that a lot of people were very happy with that. But also we try to make the jurors' experience a lot better, more comfortable. We changed the color. We added a little bit of art, kind of make it more friendly. The way we approach jurors, the way we speak to them, because I believe that the way you speak to someone is the reaction you're going to get. And so we don't want to make the juror feel more unhappy or uncomfortable or scared. And so we try to help them by doing that, making it possible for them to register online.
That's a big one.
That's a huge one because modern times, a lot of counties are going online. And so I think that helps them.
Let's talk about something that's been at the forefront of what you and I have been dealing with. We have 500 folks that fit in the jury room comfortably. We squeeze in over 600.
Yes.
We need a bigger jury room in Bexar County.
We do.
Yes.
We need a bigger room that is adapted to everyone. We have nursing moms. We have jurors that are still doing their work. And so if we had an area for all those people, that would be fantastic because I think they would feel more willing to come and serve and sit here for a few hours because they can still get their work done. Nursing moms can feel comfortable and have an area for them to relax and do what they need to do. And the rest of the jurors, they can sit there and watch TV. We do offer a TV currently, and we do recommend that they don't watch any of the news.
And that's because you don't want them to come across a case that they may sit on.
Exactly. Exactly. And so we strongly recommend that. And we're constantly monitoring the TV so that they're not watching it. And of course we tell them. And everybody with a smartphone now can easily watch the news or come across a case that is going to be heard. And so we recommend that they don't. And we tell them you can really hurt a case by doing that. But coming back to the big room, I think that making it more comfortable, because right now we do have a standing room. It pains me to see them standing because sometimes they stand there for an hour until we are done with the whole qualifications, after the judge speaks to them, and then we send them off to a break so that we can finish what we need to do and start preparing those panels and sending them to court. But also because we don't want to see them standing so much.
Let's go back a little bit to COVID. So what was it like for you to move the entire jury selection or qualification process from in-person to Zoom?
Well, Judge, remember those long days while everybody was at home? We were here till 7 o'clock at night, coming up with ideas, reading, preparing PowerPoint presentations, because we still had to present it to everyone, and everybody needed to feel comfortable. It took months and it took many hours, but I think that at the end we came up with a really good product.
So looking back, I know COVID was a terrible thing. A lot of people suffered in our community. I lost a lot of good friends. We lost a lot of good people at the courthouse as a result of COVID. Did it actually have some role to play in improving the jury system as we know it now?
Well, we learned that we can continue with jury. We can continue with that because we came up with a system that works.
So I bet you have heard every possible excuse in the book when people get summoned and come in. What are some of the funniest juror excuses that you've heard?
So I call them the ABCD excuses. Well, let's see if this one's going to work. And then we tell them, sorry, that's not an exemption for us. You do qualify. Well, I have another one. Believe it or not, people will say they have a criminal record when in fact they don't. Just so they could get out of it.
Is that the most common excuse that people give you?
That, and we live in San Antonio, so some people speak Spanish and English, but they try to say they don't speak English by speaking Spanish, but they don't realize that Schulze is my married name and I actually know Spanish. And so when I speak to them, we come to the realization that they do speak English.
My mom used to say that if I ever get summoned, I'm going to tell them I don't speak English. She would joke and say that she would do that. Does that happen often?
Yes. But the funniest, we had somebody that had a girlfriend in a different country. And country, I mean, we were separated by water. And so he claimed the exemption that he was a caretaker of this person. And he was on the phone with her. And he couldn't serve jury because he couldn't put the phone down. Because if he did, she would have an anxiety attack. And so we tried to tell him that that was not a caretaker. They need to live here. So needless to say, not very happy. And I'm not really sure what happened there because we told them, you know what, you need to speak to the judge you're assigned to. But having a girlfriend abroad and having to be on the phone doesn't constitute a caretaker.
That's bizarre. That's an interesting one.
That is.
I've had people tell me this. You know, Judge, I'm just not a good person. I'm no good. I've never been honest about anything. You don't want me on a jury. Have you ever heard that one?
Yes.
Yes. I've heard people say, you know, I just don't like people. I don't like being around people. Being in this room really makes me feel angry.
Yes, I've had that, and I've had people say, I don't like these kind of people and that kind of people. And we said, well, lucky for you, we're not qualifying based on that today, so you can go back and sit down.
Let's talk about what a day in the life of Julieta Schulze looks like. Okay, so you come in. What time does your office open?
So my office opens at 7:30. When I started back in 2012, I noticed that jurors were already lined up. They start lining up at 7.
Now the summons says 8 o'clock.
The summons says 8 o'clock. And so when I was hired, one of the things that I wanted to change was that, because it crowded the hallway. And so I didn't know exactly why there were so many people and why they weren't being moved in. And so when I took over, I said, okay, this is a problem. Let's open up at 7:30. And that way, when the employees of Bexar County would come in, they wouldn't be there with the jurors. Just so that we didn't crowd the hallways. By about 8:15, 8:20, then the judge will then come in and speak to the jurors, and the judge basically goes over the exemptions, qualifications, excuses. We'll talk to jurors that really need to speak to the judge about the qualifications, and sometimes they bring up excuses that the judge downstairs cannot take care of because once again, it has to be taken care of in the assigned court.
And every judge does that a different way. So you have some judges that just come in and they zip through the whole process. They're done speaking to the panel in 10 minutes. Like I used to be before COVID, it would speak to them for 45 minutes. I've cut that down in half now. All right.
Yes.
All right. So then,
Right.
so then depending on that process, you kind of take a break, or do you have to sort of still be on your game? People are still coming to the window.
Right. So we don't stop. Once the judge speaks to them, we then talk to them, give them additional information about how the day's going to go. We have no idea where they're going to get assigned, if they're going to get assigned, but we try to let them know that if they get assigned, they're going to be going to a courtroom, and they're going to be turned over to that courtroom, and then that's the end of our relationship.
Starting the day prior, they come into the central jury room. You have courts calling you, telling you that they need jurors.
Yes.
And so district courts generally ask for how many jurors?
They ask about 75.
That's criminal district
That's the
courts.
criminal courts.
What about on the civil side?
The civil sides usually ask about 45 to 70, depending on the type of case.
And then the county courts?
And the county courts, normally about 30 to about 50, once again, depending on the type of case we have. So it just depends on the type of case, but the standard is 75, 45, 30.
And as soon as you are done with your jurors that day, you start getting ready for the next day,
Yes.
which means you start preparing summons to mail.
We order the summons. It usually takes about 3 weeks. So we order summons 3 weeks in advance. So to give jurors the opportunity to get the mail and respond.
Is there a certain time frame that's required in the statute?
Yes. By statute, we have to mail them out at least 10 days. Now, some jurors say they just got it. There's lots of reasons why they just got it, but I mail out summons 3 weeks.
In advance?
Yes.
So I notice when I walk in, when I have to give that speech downstairs, it's a very frenetic pace. You have people that work with you that are at the window greeting people. You have others that are outside directing people. Sometimes people seem a little angry. What's that like? What's that experience like when you're dealing with 500 plus people in that room all at the same time, and you essentially are trying to get ready for the judge to come out?
So I always say we deal with 500 plus personalities. For the most part, I think jurors behave. So as difficult to deal with, we do occasionally get a few that are not happy because they're looking to be excused or disqualified. We just keep on going. We don't take anything personal. We can't. And so when I'm Julieta, I'm Julieta. So here I try to be chief jury bailiff and not Julieta.
You got to have a lot of patience. So in our capacities of what we do with the jury room, we get communications from outside of Bexar County as to how we do things.
Yes. So during COVID, a lot of, practically the world stopped, right? And for the United States, definitely the legal system was affected, as well as a lot of other areas.
And a big part of that is because we have an open court process.
Correct.
We have a process where members of the community, citizens, need to participate in.
Yes. And so a lot of the country didn't know how to come back and qualify and have juries and so forth. And so we had people from Alaska calling to find out how we were doing grand jury and was it successful. I believe NPR, TPR also, I think they interviewed you. I know they interviewed me and asked questions about how we were bringing jurors back during COVID. And so we had them. We had El Paso, Webb County, and different areas.
Dallas, Harris County.
Harris County. believe Harris County gathered so many jurors in a stadium, but we wanted to do that, but realized that would put people in danger. COVID was still pretty much present, and we still didn't know exactly how it would affect everyone.
And it was hard to find a facility
And it was
that
hard.
would be effective.
There's a lot of moving parts. It's not just, let's go summon 1,000 people and put them in a stadium.
Right. You got to deal with the sheriff, the clerk's office,
Computers,
your office,
my office,
the judge's staff.
the judge's staff, and then
Yes.
how are we going to transport all those people?
Yes.
So it was challenging. So we had people call us to find out how we were doing it because they had heard it was successful. I think people also realized what we were doing because all of our juries were streamed on YouTube.
Yes, all the jury qualifications were live streamed.
They were live streamed.
Yeah, so people could see that all over the world.
Yes.
Yes. I was interviewed by Time Magazine about how we did jury service here. We in our county were considered to be real leaders in terms of how we approach jury trials during the COVID era.
It was good. It was a good solution for such a harsh and devastating situation, but we made it work.
You were at the center of all that.
And my staff, I have to also congratulate my staff because without them, we wouldn't have been able to pull this.
Well, they adapted really well.
They did. They did.
They had to go from working in the courthouse, stop quickly, work at home. They worked regular hours.
Yes, they worked regular hours.
A lot of folks didn't understand that courthouse staff was still working regular hours during COVID.
Right.
What was that transition like to go from being an interpreter, a staff interpreter, to then running the jury room downstairs?
It was easy. I learned a lot as an interpreter. I still continue to interpret, not necessarily for the courts, but it was something to get used to.
Yes.
It was something to get used to, but I love both jobs. I love teaching interpreting, and I love working in this jury room.
What does Julieta Schulze like to do for fun?
For fun?
To relax.
Well,
and just so folks know, that was a long pause. Do you work all the time?
So I like to bake, which is not always good. I mean, it's good. The baking is good. But then I have to find people that can eat it.
You brought some of that to the courthouse, and you've shared it with the folks at the court administration.
Yes. I also like to make jewelry. So I have a whole collection of beads and so forth that I've collected in different areas of the United States.
Very nice. Julieta, I've enjoyed talking to you.
And so have I, Judge. I'm excited to be here and to explain a little bit about jury duty.
And jury service.
Jury service.
Well, we have come a long way in this county. As I mentioned before, you have really been a part of that. I don't think we would have been as successful as we have been without all the hard work and the know-how that you put into it. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Judge. And I also want to include my staff because they played an important role.
I agree. Every time I go down there, I enjoy seeing everybody that works there.
Thank you.
You've reached the end of this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate you, the audience. We'll be back in 2 weeks.
You've been listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Join us in the next 2 weeks where we are educating the public and expanding mindsets. Head to our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform to subscribe to the latest episodes and updates.